Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the English episode 2. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. It is interesting. Well, I guess we kind of got introduced to what might be our main antagonist. Was that what Thomas Hofford? Like, that was so crazy. He was in the middle of like what I'm assuming is kind of old school baseball. With a paddle instead of baseball bat, and then went and beat the ever-living shit out of a guy. We find out later on, it's like, cool, some of his like bulls or whatever were just like skinned, it looked like they look. The one we saw was pretty rough, and he's kind of jumping down the sheriff's throat because it's like, yeah, because of people like you coming here, and it's like, yeah, let's not forget old school America, everybody could get it. It's like, you're a Native American? Oh, you can get it. Oh, you're Irish? Oh, you can get it. So it's just kind of like, you came here and it's just like, because I love that he's just kind of like, yeah, this is kind of our land, which even the sheriff is almost kind of like, is that, I wouldn't kind of go that far saying it's kind of yours, but he's saying like, right, I'm the reason why this place is booming the way it is. I mean, he's in the area where, Cornelia is trying to go to for the guy who killed her. So it just seems like just douchebaggery. The fact is he beat the ever-living shit out of that dude just for the sake of like, yeah, he was on night watch and he didn't do what he was supposed to. But I love like Thomas's thing is like, no, it's got to be the Irish. It's got to be like someone in your community. But it's like, well, they've seen something similar before. The other dude was like, yeah, like he's come across the Cheyenne and they've done that before. But he's kind of like, yeah, but why would they, this is kind of your territory. Like it has to be your people who are doing something like that. So I didn't quite get what they were referencing when they looked at the sign that, like, all three of them looked up at the sign and, like, that was supposed to be significant, because it's almost like you already, like, if you look up, you already have the answer. I'm like, what? I completely missed the context of, like, what that conversation was about. And there's also that guy that, who had that run-in with, I guess they're called bushwhackers. I don't know if they're just kind of, like, I don't know if bounty hunters would be what they're called or not. I think it's more so like we're just here killing anyone we find and robbing them. Or just like, I guess the thing is like, we clear any like foreigners out there. We hunt down and kill anyone that ain't American. Like, I don't know if that's what the whole situation is there. Like, Charlie was with what's the guy? He was like a captain or something. And it's like, oh, shoot an arrow through his heart. It's like, like the moment he's like, go ahead, run away. I'm like, they're giving you a head start. They're kind of turning this into a game. It's like, oh no, like when you shoot your arrow through his heart, it'll be full of hope. And they killed him. And I think it's very, I mean, I guess you could say it's poetic what ends up finally happening to them later. It's almost just kind of like karma came back to bite them in the ass. But I mean, it's just like happenstance that they cross paths. I mean, because obviously they're still like a month away from where they're trying to get to, because they're still in Kansas and they're obviously trying to get to Wyoming is where they're trying to get. So, well, at least she's trying to get to Wyoming. He's obviously trying to get to Nebraska. But was it Wyoming that? Yeah, it's Wyoming she's trying to get to. Because that's the place we saw in the beginning, because it's still kind of like a relatively new. It had only, like, fairly recently been made into a state and stuff like that. But I love that whole death path conversation about, when people die, like the death path is kind of like the path between this life and the next. And he even says later on he shouldn't have told her about that. I guess it's something that's like, yeah, that's something between our people, so I really shouldn't be sharing that with you. I love the whole conversation about like interpreting dreams and stuff. It's like, it's like you should go to like this very specific word, kind of being like a person who interprets the dreams for you. It's like, where would I find one of those? It's like, well, you can't, because they're dead. He's like, along with a lot of other people. And it's like, well, that's kind of the catch-22 of it. It's like, so how am I supposed to interpret your dream? It's like, well, you can't really do that when the person who interprets the dreams is dead. So you kind of find yourself in that situation of like both of them trying, because she was like not sure, like she felt like this person would have a hard time dealing with her dreams because her dreams are kind of wild and everything. And it's like, So it was actually just really interesting conversation. Like I said, that catch-22 about it, of just like, how do you go, you got to find someone who can interpret your dreams, but it's hard to do that when at least one person that could do it is gone. So you're kind of left with kind of, I guess, it's up to you to kind of interpret and figure out. But I did also love, they had this powerful conversation about, the continued conversation about the death road later on, oh no, the death path later on, where it's the conversation of basically what it comes down to is how you died. Like there's the short road that is brought about by violence, by a violent death, and the long road if it's brought about your death was brought about by illness. And basically the way she said it almost makes it sound like it was a combination of the two, of which that's how her son died. Because she was like, what if it's both? And he was like, he had talked about like that obviously it's like illness can be both depending on who you ask. Because some people, it's like, right, the English came here, brought a lot of sickness, and people died. And some people say it's a short road, other people say it's a long road. And and she asked him, like, well, what do you call that? And he was like, short road. And she's like, so violent. You know, it's like, yeah. So, and then she's like, then I guess we're both staring at the same road. So I guess it's more so implying, like, yes, her son died by both. It's like, yes, it was a violent death, but also because it was brought about by illness. Either the guy didn't want to, like, I'm curious what it is, a thing of like, oh, did he have the means to cure her son's illness or something, and he didn't, so that's why it was an illness that killed him, but also a violent death? Or was it just something he did that caused the kid to get sick? And it's hard to really say. Once again, we're still dancing around and not really talking about it. And because I love that this is an episode where Eli and Cornelia really got to know each other. They spend a lot of time, obviously a lot more time being able to talk this episode. They have the entire episode to kind of talk to each other. And I thought that was kind of a powerful thing. But as I was bringing up earlier, they ended up running into the guys who were doing the bushwhacking. And one of the guys, Charlie, knows, because he was in battles with Eli, so he knows him. He's like, yeah, I've been telling them stories about you and stuff. And it's like, cool. And the moment they rolled up, it's like, okay, I'm going to take the other two on the left. You're going to shoot Charlie's, before he knew Charlie had rolled up, he was like, you're going to shoot his horse in the gut. And she's like, his horse? And he's like, oh, right, now you're going to get picky? So she actually ended up being the one that popped off first, because, like, you know, it's just like, right, give the bag. It's like, nothing worth dying for. It's like, well, if that's the case, hand over the bag. And so, because obviously they're doing this whole thing because in the army, that's how what they're doing, bushwhacking, it's better than a army pension. But it's also like, yeah, you wouldn't know anything about that because of the color of your skin. You ain't getting no pension. So that's why, like, all he has is the land that's supposedly owed to him. And I say supposedly because the whole point in the first episode was, you really think they're going to honor that deal? And it's like, I think for Eli, it's like, well, what else do I have? I have nothing else. I don't have my people to turn to. Like, all I have is this promise that this government gave me at the end of the day, and I'm going to make them give me what I'm owed. And what he'll ultimately do from there, who knows? Like, you know, will it make up for everything? Will you just be able to live a quiet life, not haunted by the ghost of what you've done and what you've lost? I don't, it's not a great equivalency of just like, yeah, just like everything's going to be equal, everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's like nothing like that, but it's like, I don't know if Eli's even looking for it to fill that void or anything like that. It's just like, right, I'll stay on my land, I'll get my few bits of land, and I'll stay there in my acres and just die. Like, that's all I have to look forward to. That's all there is. So I'll make do with whatever life I have, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, things popped off. The one guy ran away, and it got, like, obviously Cornelia was going for the shots, but her gun, like, jammed or whatever. And Eli had the shot, but he didn't do it. And it was actually Cornelia who put Charlie down, which poetically, like, I don't know if she actually hit him in the heart. The arrow pierced through the back. It didn't go through like Charlie's did. So I wonder, like, did Charlie's arrow, like, happen to pierce and miss every vital organ because it didn't get stuck? So I'm wondering, like, the fact is, it feels poetic that he was trying to go for that dude's heart. And I can only assume, and just for poetic irony, that Cornelia's arrow hit his heart. And obviously it devastated her, because I think that's the first time, at least that we're aware of, that she straight up killed someone. And Eli kind of took the bow from her and didn't really say anything. Because I interpret that as her being like, I want to do this. I have to do this because last thing we want is him out there, like, telling her his location, and he could always kind of come back for revenge. But Eli wasn't going to do it, because it's one thing. I think when you spend enough time potentially killing your own people, like, it cuts you deep enough already. That is like, right, I did that while I'm in the service. I'm not in the service anymore. I don't want to do that. And it's just kind of like what do I do? Like, and I think she did that so he wouldn't have to. But even later on, she's like, what was going to happen back during the, he was like, because they neither one of them, because she's like, oh, he was like, do you want to talk about the fight? And she's like, well, what about you? He's like, well, this happened and that happened. That's about it. You know, he made kind of quick talk of the conversation. But he even says later on, it's like, yeah, even the Charlie thing, like, even if I hadn't, like, even if I took my shot and killed him, it wouldn't matter. Like, even if he had gotten away, even if you hadn't put him down, he would have been dead either way. Like, he was on his own. Someone would have hunted him down regardless, or because probably saying like he had nowhere else to turn to, the wilderness, like being on foot probably would have gotten killed. Like, just there's so many, like, there's so many different ways he would have died, and I think maybe that's the conversation they're kind of having there. So for him, it's like, yeah, whether I killed him or not, his fate was sealed. He was already going to die. This is after they found the wagon that was attacked, and like obviously Cornelia was going to go for the coyotes, but he's like, don't. They didn't cause this. They're just cleaning it up. And I think, I would assume that's kind of that thing of like, right, you kind of kill the animals like if they were a danger, but it's like, no, those coyotes aren't a danger, they didn't cause this devastation. They didn't kill. They're just like, you know, they're just scavenging what's left. And sadly, the guy's wife had died. Like, I don't know if because I was wondering if they did anything, because they probably didn't know that she would, well, they had to, I'm sure, like, because all that stuff was scattered around. I'm assuming that that trio, like, went through their stuff and just left stuff everywhere, and that probably attracted the coyotes. I wonder, they probably didn't do anything to the wife. They probably just let her be, because she might have already been dead, or because they left her there, she died. But Eli was able to save the child, which is even, and now it makes sense why he even did that too. He says like he has practice because of horses, but I guess he was lying at the time, because he talks about he did the same thing to his wife. He saved their daughter, but sadly she only lived for 2 years before dying from an illness. So, but also Cornelia found the daughter, and now it's like, well, what are we going to do? I love that whole back and forth they have, where he's like basically like, no, put her up to your breast, and like maybe you'll start producing milk. She's like, no, I can't, I shouldn't. Because I think for her, it's like, this isn't my baby. But even he's like, you lost your child, so take this child. It's like, yes, but this isn't like this. Their mother just is barely cold in the ground, and she doesn't feel right, because he's like, you were a mother. She's like, I am a mother. And I think for her, taking someone else's child, I think she feels like is kind of a slight against their mother that just died. Taking them as our own feels like, I think for her, backwards, considering it's like they just lost their mom, and it'd almost be like trying to substitute me for their mom and substituting them for the child I lost. And for her, it's like, I don't want that. You know, I want revenge for my child, and I want to feel that pain, because I think taking on another child, especially one that's not yours, that you found along the way, probably makes her feel like I said, a slight against her own child. But I think like it almost like trying to put a band-aid over this gaping wound, and she wants it to be open because she wants to feel what she's feeling, you know? So I love the whole thing, but it's like, yeah, you have a child. And she's like, oh, you have a family. You lost an entire family. So what's that say about you? And he's like, with you? Basically, like, oh, you want me to start a family? And she's like, no, I'm just turning the argument against you. I thought that was such a cute thing of her kind of getting a little flustered there with that conversation. So. And that whole conversation of, right, you say all these negative things, but when things happen, you always do the opposite of what you say. He's like, yeah, I have a hard I always tell myself one thing, but I just never listen to myself. He's like, at least one of these times I'm going to need to start doing that. But they had come across an allotment beforehand where, was it John and Katie were saying, which John is the actor who plays, Dan from, Resident Alien. It's kind of one of the things I best know him from, especially more recently. But either way, I also love the conversation where it's like, hey, don't tell you have money. It's like, well, why not? It's like, have you met anyone out here you could trust with that information? And partway through the conversation, she lets up. She's like, oh, I could pay for it. And they all kind of pause and look, and you just see Eli going, almost like, didn't I tell you not to bring the money situation? But they kind of like let it slide. She's like, no, like kind of the Christian way would be for things to kind of like pray on and just kind of wait for things to kind of like things will work themselves out either way. They don't kind of like go asking or taking anything. It's like, oh no, it's the Christian way is to believe that it's going to like all work itself out. And then there's the conversation about what they're going to do afterwards, because obviously this family, they can't, well, they were going to try and leave the children there, but it's also like, well, they did have family that came through looking for these exact people. Was it like referencing like, oh, Mennonites? Oh God, there was a very specific term they used to describe them, and because later on Eli's like, oh, have you heard of them before? And for him, it's basically like, people came here, took land that wasn't theirs, and then they basically took us, put us on this strip of rock, and then basically took the rest of the land and divvied it up with other people. So he's like, yeah, these people come here taking land that wasn't even theirs to begin with, like land that was taken from us, taken and given to other people. And it's like, yeah, people are basically coming here like stepping over each other, trying to get land that was never theirs to begin with. And he had talked about the story of his wife and his daughter. He's like, I'd come through this territory before. And for him, having lost his daughter, that's why for him it's a whole conversation of, I don't want to move backwards. Because if I follow you back to like where you want to try and follow this child's family, he's like, I get it, you do what you got to do. But for him, it's like, I refuse to go backwards, because I think for him, it's like, right, going back would just bring up those memories, especially with the baby and the little girl. And I think maybe it's just his fear that, like, maybe it's some fear of not only that coming back, but it even happening again, because it's like, right, on the way there, things kind of potentially go sideways. But Eli made sure, like, right when she left, like, that he knew, like, it's like, oh, you're a Scorpio, right? He's like, oh yeah. She's like, Scorpio. He's like, yeah, well, the thing about scorpions, they have stingers, and like, sometimes they can sting themselves. And she's like, well, I'll watch out for that. He's like, you can't help it, it's part of your nature, So he's like, right, the bow and arrow is great, but if someone gets close, keep the knife ready, because basically they'll get distracted by your face. I interpreted that as her being like, what's that mean? It's like, I mean, he didn't outright say it, but I can only assume it's like, it's like, well, I mean, outside context, it's like, well, you're Emily Blunt and you're very beautiful. So there's that. But it's like, yeah, it's just like natural. It's like, yeah, she's a very pretty lady. So it's like, use that opportunity, because you are a woman with a pretty face. And it's like, it will catch. You have that moment when people be like, oh, you got a pretty face. That's when you go for the, I mean, you don't have to literally go for the jugular, but metaphorically go for the jugular, because that's your moment to strike. Was it steady is quickness? Or is it quickness is steady? I think it's steady is quickness, but it might be the other way around. So they end up kind of sadly going their separate ways. And it's like, right, she wants to do what's right by this, because I think, maybe like having been a mother herself and knowing like, right, they have no one else in this world, and like they have family nearby, at least relatively close enough that I have to be the one to kind of take steps back going towards Oklahoma to take them back, so. But I guess he's going to continue his journey to Nebraska. And he ended up giving her a compass, because he had taught her earlier on, like, the stick thing. But for him, it's like, no, I don't need to do that. Just because, like, yeah, like, there's, like, we've been on this land for 2,000 years. We don't need it, but in case you need it for direction, but ended up giving her the compass later on. I'm actually skipping over also a really, really good conversation that they had, too, about, because she had referenced Charlie telling stories about him, and he talks about, obviously for his people, it's like, we don't write stuff down. We don't, like, I guess it's like, we never really bothered to learn to read or write. It's like, well, how do you record your history? You pass it down in stories. And it's like, for forever, that's always been their thing. But obviously Eli talks about the fact is, well, she'd ask, how do you go about it, considering the fact is you don't talk much? And he was like, that's because I learned, I guess, like, the kind of, like, learn not to talk much. And I think that whole element is why he kind of, like, later on he references it. I think that story ended up tying into, later on he references, like, ties back to that whole, learning not to talk as much. I think he tied that back into, the land being stolen and stuff like that, and that whole scene where he was also talking about his wife and his daughter. I think it was all connected. I could be misremembering, but I love that she was, because it's like, yeah, because it's like, she's like, is that why you didn't kill Charlie? Because he's someone that knew your stories. And she's like, don't worry, I will willingly tell your stories in the future, which I think plays nicely with what we know from the future, where she's talking about, Eli the way she is. So I'm assuming it's supposed to be a thing of that is her kind of telling his story to some extent, their story, But, I just thought that was kind of neat. And like I said, I wasn't expecting them to ever split up. So I guess it's like, right, we go our separate ways. But if the stars deem it, which I believe they will, that these two will cross paths again. So I think that's interesting. You're meeting one episode, and this next episode, you're spending so much time together, knowing each other, talking to each other, and then kind of going your separate ways. Yeah, because that whole really quickly I forgot there was that whole conversation too about soldiers. Because we found out her father is a soldier too, and obviously he gained like some bit of land. She's like, yeah, and compared to what you would consider big, like there isn't. She's like, I wouldn't consider it as much, but basically like kind of making a lot of comparisons between Eli and her father, and she was saying like. Kind of almost like he didn't talk much, and she's like, that's what made him a great soldier. But like her reaction kind of made it seem like there were complications with, I guess, like being a good soldier that maybe probably didn't always make him a good father. So there seems like there's a lot kind of in that expression, and kind of some of that silence in between. It makes it seem like that there was more story there about like her dad and stuff, because she talked about the fact is that she lived with her boy on the grounds, like like her parent, like her dad at the very least lived in the main house. I'm assuming that might have included her mom. That wasn't really part of the conversation, just her dad. Maybe she said parents, I don't remember, but she lived on a house on the grounds, and maybe there's something to that, What it is exactly, that's why I'm saying, like, feels like some of that silence in between kind of made it seem like there's way more to the story she hadn't quite, and maybe she's just not quite to the point she's ready to talk about it yet, or... Because them, it's a whole conversation about, especially this episode, is kind of about leaving the past behind and kind of moving forward, because... That was a thing that John had said to Eli, where he was talking about how the only way to survive in this world is to basically you have to forget your past, It's like, how can you ever... It's like, right, you're trying to go to Nebraska because that's where you were from, you were born, and you try to hold on to who you were. But in order to survive, like, how can you hold on to any part? Because you have to let go of the past, like basically like joining up the army the way we did, which Eli did tell Cornelia he did it willingly. I think it's just kind of a thing of like, well, it's willing, but up to like also like, well, how much choice do you really have? And it's like, yeah, like to survive in this world, you have to forget what you were. And it's like, yeah, we want to like return to who we were afterwards, but it's like that's kind of too far going. Like you had to kind of cut yourself free from that in order to survive. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting conversation, and I think it kind of flows nicely, especially with Eli being like, I can move forward, I can't move backwards, because I think there's too many ghosts, too much haunting the past, he's trying to move forward while still trying to hold on to who he was. And it's like, can those two things coexist? I thought was kind of interesting, because John's kind of like, no, it can't, but it seems like Eli's actively trying to make the two coexist. But I just thought that was such an interesting conversation they ended up having about that. So I think it fit like I said, that thematic thing of moving backwards and moving forwards, so. But we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.